Happy Tuesday, NCAA men's basketball fans. This is your weekly Trog cast. This is Jeff Zink on one end, one of the truly old men talking NCAA basketball. On the other end is Jim Reaker on a little snowy, windy, snappy day here in Cincinnati. How you doing, Jim?
Pretty good. Well, that's the way it should be. Like two old men with Old Man Winter making an appearance today.
I mean, welcome Old Man Winter anytime. Nothing we can do about it, so we might as well try to enjoy it, but we'll see how it goes from there. Well, a fun week to talk about. There's no doubt about it. It happens almost every year sometime in there. As I put it to you, the wackiness begins. Last week, number 1 and number 2 fall. Duke to Boston College, Kansas, number 2 twice to Washington and to Arizona State. And as I ask you, which to you was the bigger surprise of the top 2 falling?
I guess Kansas losing 2 in a row really is the biggest surprise. And overall, just think about this, Jeff. This year, here's the thing that's a little bit different. Yeah, we see a lot of upsets during this time period. We talked last week a little bit about, it's exam time and holiday time and all kinds of distractions, which I think leads some teams to not play up to their potential during this stretch here before we get into the conference schedule. But here's the thing that really surprises me this year. I don't know if we've ever seen this before, is majorly ranked teams losing multiple games. And it goes all the way back to starting when number 2 Arizona lost 3, and somewhere down in the Caribbean they were playing a turn 3 in a row and fell out of the rankings. Then you have number 5 Florida, who lost to Duke, which wasn't a surprise, but then followed up with 2 losses to Florida State and Loyola of Chicago. Yeah, and then Kansas losing 2 in a row. Another one, Minnesota, losing 3 out of 4 after reaching a high water mark of number 12 in the country. And you have USC, who at one time was ranked number 10, and they've lost 3 in a row. So that's the unusual thing, is these teams seem to get in a funk or something goes on, and they don't really fix it right away.
Well, the only thing I'd say that I slightly disagree with is this seems to happen every year. I mean, you remember Michigan State sort of took its tumble last year, and Duke had its issues coming in. As we've mentioned several times, these rankings, and we sort of thought they had settled down last week. Usually the early rankings are based upon more what teams did last year and maybe what they think the recruiting class is going to be like. But now I think we're really seeing things start to settle in. I would look at it the other way. I mean, I hear what you're saying with Kansas, and both of them are surprises. I think the bigger surprise, of course, is Duke losing to Boston College, is at the bottom of the ACC almost every year and known more for its football than it is for its basketball. And I got a feeling that if a lot of people tried to name the teams in the ACC, Boston College would be one of the ones they wouldn't be able to name. But Kansas not as much for 2 reasons. One, we'll talk about a little bit later about the rise of Arizona State and how far they've gone. And also it seems like Mike Hopkins has been able to make that turnaround in Washington a little quicker than they thought. I mean, they had some talent there last year. They weren't able to deal with it with the coach that they had in Markelle Fultz. But, I mean, his only losses right now are to Providence, Virginia Tech, and Gonzaga. And, of course, they beat Kansas. So it looks like the Huskies might be a little bit more formidable than people thought, which is going to really throw things a bit of a wrench into what looks like it's going to be a season-long scramble in the Pac-12.
Yeah, and here's one note I came across this morning, and I don't have a reason why this happened, but that Boston College win over Duke, yeah, that's an ACC game. So I went to the ACC standings and that was the only ACC game played. And then looking ahead, it looks like their conference season, like all the rest of most of the conferences, except the Big Ten, which we know started last week, had a couple games. For some reason, they played that game outside the regular conference time frame. I would guess it's probably a scheduling thing, but that's almost like setting Duke up or giving them a challenge And here's the problem with Duke. I think they're just so young. In fact, I'm going to make this. I'll say this, and then I'll explain it. I think Duke is this year's UK of the past 5 or 6 years. I think they have the cream of the crop of the one and dones. I think they're starting 4 of them with Grayson Allen. So when you do that, and you go into a situation, and I saw a lot of that game. It was a crazy environment. They got behind early and got the Boston College crowd into it, and tough game on the road. It was the first road game for Duke, so we shouldn't be too surprised that happened with all those factors involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, with you, last week I said I thought it would be they obviously wouldn't go undefeated. I didn't expect them to lose that early in the ACC battles, but I knew battling through there. It's just funky to see Boston College at the top of the ACC ranking. Of course, like I said, it's the only game so far. And who knows, maybe they're going to be better. Their only losses are to Texas Tech, Providence, and Nebraska. So maybe they're going to try to turn around what's traditionally been a football school. Well, that brings, that is a very tough. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Well, here's just one last point, too, I just thought about with all these upsets, and is maybe the parity in college basketball is just, it's shrunk. I mean, from 1 to 351, or how many teams there are in Division I, maybe there's not that big of difference anymore. And I would say, obviously, from 1 to 30, on any given night, anybody can beat anybody. So that might be part of it, too. I just think, the shooting that I have seen, especially the three-point shooting in a lot of games, I just think players are better than they've been in the past, and now you don't have those dominant teams that have the best players, although you do, but still everybody has some decent players.
Yeah, that's true. It's going to bounce all around. That leads us to the wackiness of some of the rest of the top 25. And you can tell us, I'll do this rundown. You can tell me what your surprise is from there. Florida lost twice and then rebounded against Cincinnati with the win, which was supposed to be a home game for Cincinnati. It was actually played in New Jersey. It might have been a little different had it been a real home game. Arizona bounces back with a win over Texas A&M. Notre Dame, and this must have been hard in your household. I wonder if you had a little side bet. Notre Dame loses to Ball State. Minnesota, like you said, as losing to Miami, you kind of expect, but then Nebraska and Arkansas, these aren't Nebraska might be a little tougher. Arkansas is not the team it's been in the past, and they've fallen into the realm of the unranked. And then Nevada, which had a heady entry into the top 25, it became very short-lived as they limp out of Texas with losses to Texas Tech and TCU on that part of the wackiness. So, you've already sort of mentioned Minnesota and Arizona a little bit. What else have you got there and all that wackiness in the top 25?
Well, the biggest surprise to me was the Ball State win over Notre Dame, just because Notre Dame was ranked number 6 in the country. I've seen them play a couple times. They're the only team that's beat Wichita State, and everybody says Wichita State might be a Final Four team this year. They got everybody back from I think it was an Elite 8 team or at least a Sweet 16 team last year, and Greg Marshall's got things going there. So Notre Dame just doesn't lose a game like that at home. But Ball State, again, played very, very well. A side note on that, Taylor Persons, I believe his name is, hit a three-pointer with 3.3 seconds left to win that game by 3 points for the Ball State Cardinals. But just to carry on, actually on Saturday, the Cardinals hosted Valparaiso, who always has a decent team, and he hit a three-pointer with 1.7 seconds left to give them a 1-point win over Valparaiso. So Taylor Persons had a heck of a week, too, game-winning shots near the buzzer. And then a little bit of side note on him we've talked about NKU, the team in our metro area that we think's a very good mid-major team. He actually played there for a couple years before he transferred to Ball State. Wasn't aware of that. So that young man's having a great season. He's from Kokomo, Indiana. And so that's the biggest surprise to me. You just don't expect Notre Dame to lose to a mid-major at home at this time of year.
You're right. We'll talk a little bit more about the state of Indiana a little bit in the week coming up and what they got going. But now the question is, did you call your son and rub it in a little bit?
No. So he's. I don't know if they're that big of basketball fans out there for the Notre Dame. It's all about football.
Jim is a graduate of Ball State, and his son is currently attending graduate school at Notre Dame, and they always have a good fun. He goes up and teases his son that went to Marquette within that Big East rivalry as well. Well, let's get back to normalcy here. Most of the rest of that, it's not a surprise as things bounce back and forth. We expected Arizona to come back. Minnesota, I think they'll be back in the Big Ten too. They might have been a little heady in Nevada. They weren't going to be part of the big picture anyway. But on the normal side, we see Villanova, which won a good game against Gonzaga, and that might have been the game that leapfrogged them over Michigan State into the number 1 spot this week, I should say. Xavier continues to roll. They've moved up 3 spots. They beat Baylor and Cincinnati and Colorado. Baylor and Colorado were 2 revenge wins from last year's losses that kind of made them stumble. And now their solo loss to Arizona State doesn't look as bad as people might have thought it would. Virginia and West Virginia played a great game, good hard-nosed basketball that went down to the end, and the home team prevailed there. And like you said earlier, and this isn't a surprise, the way they played, it's an overall surprise because you thought Andy Enfield's squad was going to be there, but it sort of stays with what's been happening in the Pac-10 is that USC continued its downfall with a loss to Oklahoma. So what are we seeing there on the rise in the top 25?
Well, I think and I heard Jay Bilas, so I'm not going to take total credit for this comment, but I totally agree with him. He made the comment, he says, Duke probably has the best talent in the country with those 4 freshmen and Grace and Allen, but Villanova is the best team. They have the best chemistry. And Villanova, not only do they have great players, but they have experience. Of course, Jalen Brunson's back, and he's averaging 17 points. Mikal Bridges is back. He's averaging 18 points. Phil Booth, who was out the entire year last year but had a great year the season before, he's back now and averaging 12. They got Dante DiVincenzo. And I thought we would get past the name problems with Villanova after Ryan Arcidiacono, which I finally could say without looking at it, graduated. But now we got Dante DiVincenzo, who I think is called the Michael Jordan of wherever he's from, Delaware maybe. And he's a great playmaker. He doesn't score a lot of points, but he gets that offense going. And to throw into the mix, they have a great freshman who, Omari Spellman, who is averaging 7 rebounds a game and putting up 9 points. So Villanova is, in my mind, they're the best team in the country and probably will remain the best team in the country. I would bet money they're going to be a number 1 seed, although they do have the tough Big East to go through, and of course have to play Xavier twice. And I don't expect them, as I said last week, I don't expect anybody to go undefeated through this season, but they seem to be the cream of the crop. You just got it all. You got talent, you got experience, you got great coaching. They play defense. They don't turn the ball over a lot. You just look at why they win, and it's easy to see. So that's my biggest takeaway from that. Xavier, that Arizona State loss does not look as bad, and they are playing very, very well. Those last 3 games, they've just gotten off to great starts. In fact, against the Colorado Buffaloes on Saturday, I think by the 10-minute mark, it was like 31-10. And it's like they get off to these great starts, and then they can pretty much just cruise through the rest of the game playing trading baskets when you get that big of a lead over your opponent. So, and I look forward to those Villanova-Xavier games. I think those are going to be wars. There's going to be great games. But there's also other Seton Hall, St. John's doing very well. Marquette shooting great 3-pointers. I think the Big East is just going to be a battle all the way to the end.
Well, you're right. We've only got, I think, 6 or 7 teams left undefeated in Division I. And ESPN this morning predicted when each of them would lose. And for Villanova, it was that game at Xavier in mid-February, and that's about what it seems to come down to every year. And it'd be interesting, and we're still talking about the previews when they do get in, that's when they start beating up on each other in conference. That's when things really get interesting. But it will be interesting to see I didn't put this in the notes, but I mentioned it last week. It's great to see what's going on in Texas in terms of basketball. Baylor, I'll hear it in a little bit, and they've been there, but to see Texas Tech on a roll and Texas A&M, these teams at TCU that aren't necessarily known for their basketball, playing good basketball and keeping it together. And you still got other teams. I think Shaka Smart's going to have Texas in there and Southern Methodist. A lot of great schools down there to see them getting off to their start. And that kind of brings us to our next topic, which is, and we talked about them a lot last year, is Arizona State this year's Baylor? Right now, Arizona State is at number 5. Baylor's at number 21. If you may remember last year, Baylor got no love in the preseason poll. Same happened for the Sun Devils this year. Both colleges known more for other sports, particularly football, than basketball. They both reeled off upsets against ranked teams. Baylor last year they knocked off Michigan State and then Louisville and Xavier, who were all in the top 25 before they could move in. And Arizona State's now knocked off Xavier and Kansas. And the coaches both come from deep family coaching trees. The Drew family out of Valpo and the Hurleys. Bob from the New Jersey high school ranks. They've also got brothers who coach at powerful schools. Scott Drew's brother took over for his dad. They both took over for their dads at different times at Valpo, and Dan Hurley at Rhode Island has already made some noise. I think the only difference is that it wasn't as much of a surprise last year because Scott Drew, who brought Baylor back from the Dave Bliss issues, does have 2 Elite Eights and an NIT championship on his record. They sort of went out in the first round the year before at 22-10. They weren't on anybody's radar. They finished in the Sweet 16 last year. And Bobby Hurley's Sun Devils, the year before they were only 15-18, and they haven't been to the tournament in 3 years. So I guess the question is, and we may find out in their Pac-12 opener against Arizona, can Arizona State rise up to number 1 like the Bears did last year?
No. And
no.
In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see Arizona State do what some of these other teams we've talked about this morning do and lose 2 or 3 in a row. Because if you look deep inside those games, basically what Arizona State is doing is they're outscoring people. They're not necessarily playing great defense. And you know the old adage, and they, in fact, here's a couple stats for you. Against Xavier, they shot 48% from three-point, and against Kansas, they shot 50% from three-point. And you know the old saying, live by the 3, die by the 3. So there's going to be a night when things aren't going down for them. And, again, they are not a great defensive team. So I don't look for them. In fact, I'll tell you right now, I think Arizona will beat them in a couple weeks. And I believe they'll lose some games. They'll make the tournament. I think they'll be up near the top of the Pac-10 because they are very, very talented. They are very, very fast. They got 4 guards that can shoot the lights out from 3 and can drive and dish. He's got a good thing going there, but they're not the complete team. Again, they don't play great defense. Plus, they're a little bit thin under the basket. They've lost a couple players, one to eligibility, one to injury, who would help them out in the post. I think they're going to get one of them back here soon. But they're a little bit weak under the basket. They don't rebound all that well. And, again, the shots are going to start. I mean, I remember watching play against Xavier. There were some shots. And the same thing, I watched almost all the second half of that game against Kansas because I kind of flipped it over and it was a close game. And, again, they didn't miss at 3 and from deep downtown. And, again, as you know through experience, watching this game for many, many years, that there's just going to be nights that it isn't going to go down for them and they're going to be in trouble.
Well, yeah, they're going to go down, much like, Baylor. They had a nice run. They rose all the way up to number 1 and held it for, basically all of a week before they lost to West Virginia, but then came back and beat number 25 Kansas State, and they stayed in the top 10 until right before tournament time when they stumbled a little bit. But Arizona State, there's a couple things. Yeah, they hit the three, but I've got to disagree with you on a couple things, and that is going inside. Romello White has made a big difference with them, and even Coach Self had to bring back in his big boys against him, because as soon as they put Odaka Azubuike on the bench, the Sun Devils started pounding it inside. And he had to bring his guy back off the bench just to try to stop it. Unfortunately, he wasn't to. And here's the other thing I think changes it, that they're not just a three-point team, is the Sun Devils get to the free throw line more than anybody else. They're averaging almost 30 free throws a game, if you can imagine that, and they hit them. So, yeah, I think the three-point openings that you're talking about are created because teams have to collapse inside on them or guard against that in the paint sort of thing. But I agree with you too. They're not going. They could very well rise to number one if a couple teams in front of them stumble, like happened with the Bears last year. But Bobby Hurley's got them ready to play. That match against Arizona in a couple of weeks here, I think it's December 30th, which opens their Pac-12. And, of course, it's always a big thing. We talk about the UC Xavier thing on our Razorcast, even though they're only 3 miles away. I mean, these two schools are only an hour away. That's like 3 miles out west. You've driven out there, so you know. It's going to be quite a battle. And, of course, they're the only one of 3 teams that got any votes for number one in the country this year: Villanova, Michigan State, and Arizona State. So it will be interesting to see how things go from here.
Yeah, and one other key point about why they've been so successful, 2 of their guards, Trey Holder and Shannon Evans II, are seniors. But them with Remy Martin, who's a freshman, and you see them, all 3 of them are, if they're all 3 6 foot, I don't know. I think they're listed at over 6 foot, but they don't even look it. But they all 3 have a knack for being able to drive and, again, get fouled a lot of times. But they're also, you could tell they've played against bigger opponents their whole life, because they can get shots off driving inside by high banking or using the rim to go up underneath it. They all have that ability to score over rim defenders, as we call them. So, yeah, they're good and they're fun to watch. But, again, I just don't think they're going to be – I don't think they'll make it to number one, because I think they're going to lose before Villanova does. Again, I don't think Villanova is going to lose until well into their Big East schedule somewhere.
Yeah. And Remy Martin, hard-nosed defender, and he's just all over the guards in that Kansas game. And, of course, if he ends up going to the pros, there's a cognac sponsorship waiting to happen with a name like Remy Martin, no doubt about that. Do you this will be interesting. Those 2, the teams that we're talking about, Baylor and Arizona State. Do you know their coaching connections to the tri-state area?
Arizona State. I do know the Arizona State, and I can't think of his name right now, but played and coached a little bit at Xavier. Actually, I saw him out there. I was sitting there watching, and somebody was sitting close to me and said to the son, he goes, he used to be at Xavier. And I was looking at him thinking, who is that? Who has it? And I looked it up, and I really didn't even recognize the name. He didn't play a whole lot for Xavier, but he was an assistant coach. Baylor's connection to the tri-state is what do I have to – man, we've gotten into trivia early today. Baylor's connection to the tri-state.
It's 2 ASU connections. No real Baylor one other than the Drew family in South Indiana. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other, so my first one's right? Do you know his name, who I'm talking about?
Yeah, we talked about it a little in the last year. It's Ned Walk.
Yeah.
It's around. He coached at Xavier, won 89 games at Xavier before he went to Arizona State, where he's still the number 1 coach with 406 wins. In fact, I think the court there at Arizona State is named for him. And the other connection is Herb Sendek, who was the coach before Bobby Hurley, who, of course, coached at Miami of Ohio for several years before he went on to North Carolina State.
Okay.
That's a lot of it. Not a real trivia. Just wanted to know if you saw it. And of course, the most fun one, it's not quite the Tri-State, is Bill Frieder, who went there and then got replaced at Michigan because Bo Schembechler wanted a Michigan man coaching Michigan in 1989, and Steve Fisher took them to the championship.
National championship as a head coach, first thing he did. It's hard to top after that.
All downhill from there. Steve Fisher had a pretty good career. That leads us to this week, and we got some fun games coming up. Of course, as I say, there's only one matchup in the top 25, and that's where North Carolina plays Tennessee. North Carolina coming in at number 7 and Tennessee at number 20. But there are some interesting matchups. Your home state of Indiana gets ready to shine with their little matchup there in Indianapolis. Butler will take on Purdue, and Indiana will take on Notre Dame. We got Cincinnati, who could rebound from a couple tough losses. They've got Mississippi State tonight, and Mississippi State's coming in undefeated. And then by the time they get ready next this Saturday, they've got to face up against a recentered UCLA team. We'll see if Oklahoma turned out to be more than a one-trick pony, because they've got to take on Wichita State. We'll see if Nebraska's for real when they host Kansas. So what are you going to be watching in the week to come?
Well, tonight I'll probably be watching Mississippi State and UC. It seems to be the only big game on the tube this evening that I've seen. Of course, again, I think part of it is because a lot of schools are in their finals period, so they kind of pare the schedule back during this week before the holidays. But obviously be watching the games in Indiana. And, of course, we've talked about a little bit before that they've talked about possibly trying to get something like that going in Ohio with UC Xavier, Dayton, and Ohio State. And what a marketing genius move that they made. I think it's about maybe 5 years going now. You got the 4 best teams in the state of Ohio, and all 4 of them are always nationally ranked. They all come to Indianapolis, which you're drawing a crowd to Indianapolis during the holiday season. I'm sure the restaurants and the shopping places just love this. So I'll be watching that. Nebraska we talked about a little last week, and I did watch them play Creighton a little bit because I kind of had put them at the bottom of the Big Ten and made some disparaging comment about them. And you said, well, they're not all that bad. Check them out. And I think Creighton did end up beating them by 10 at home. But Nebraska, they are pretty decent, and it'll be interesting to see can Kansas, get back onto the winning track. They're sitting on 13 conference championships in a row, either winning or sharing it. And again, that's if they win it this year, I believe they will actually break John Wooden's record at UCLA. He won 13 conference championships in a row. Of course, he won how many national championships in a row?
Yeah. It will be interesting to see. In that Nebraska team been kind of up and down. They lost to St. John's, they lost to Central Florida, they lost to Michigan State. And like I say, dropped that game against Creighton, but also beat Minnesota in there. So it'll be interesting to see which way they go. I got a feeling you're right. By the time it's all over, they're going to be toward the bottom of the Big Ten. But they've made a little noise at the start of the season here, and everybody likes that little showdown. The one problem with trying to do that in Ohio is that none of those 4 teams are centered in Indianapolis, so nobody really has a technical home advantage, whereas doing it in Ohio, if you did it in Columbus, that's where OSU is centered. But I'm sure we could find someone. Maybe Cleveland would host it because none of the teams are out of there. But that would be fun. It's always good. And looking at the other one, I think the matchup against North Carolina and Tennessee is going to find out what it's like to play with the big boys. They've had a good run so far, but their lone loss is to Villanova, so you can't complain about that. They've also topped Purdue. But other than that, not a whole lot on their schedule, so I think they'll find out how real it is on Sunday against North Carolina. But then again, maybe it's going to end up being one of those upsets. And like I said, I think Mississippi State comes back to earth today. They're 8-0, but they haven't really played anybody. Another one of the
they're not even ranked, are they?
No, they're not. They did beat Dayton by 2 That's about the only one. And another team that's in that undefeated schedule we've already talked about, we'll talk about more on our Razorcast on Thursday, I'm sure, is Georgetown, who hasn't really played much of anybody either. So, as always, it'll be an interesting week in sports. Like you mentioned, it's kind of a down week because a lot of teams are taking it off for exams to finish up. They either got one game or no games. TCU isn't playing. A lot of them have cupcakes on the schedule. Duke isn't playing anything, whereas Michigan State's playing Oakland up there in Michigan, and you got Texas A&M playing Savannah State. So, West Virginia playing Wheeling Jesuit. So even if they have games, a lot of them aren't ones that they have to pump up for too much, except for those ones that we mentioned. So it will be interesting to see as we come in next week, which will get us 1 week closer to the conference schedules, most of which start in that last week of December. All right. Anything else you want to enlighten us on before we get on to our trivia and tidbits?
No, I always look at the television schedule usually every morning just to see who might be playing. And like tonight, you got just the only ranked teams playing UC again against Mississippi State, and Seton Hall playing St. Peter's. So not only do teams a lot of times not play a lot, but even if they do have games scheduled, a lot of the top-ranked teams are playing what we would term cream puffs. So even if they are in their finals, it's not a lot of effort given. In fact, I think I heard Chris Mack say that he was going to give his players Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off. They wouldn't even start practicing this week till Thursday for their Saturday game.
Yeah, they've had actually no game scheduled since that win in Colorado last Saturday. And why not? It is the student athlete part of it, and if you don't want to do that, you can always, there are other options to explore, as one family we don't like to talk about has finally done, and that's why I think UCLA be interesting to see how they do against Cincinnati now that go. All right, I'm sure that you have you found something here of interest.
I had to do my homework early because last week I saved it till late and I didn't get it done. I did a little more. I still have not answered that question that I asked you on our Razorcast last week. So
I decided that the proper name is Jeffrey Paul. I mean, if we can't find out what his initials are, we're going to go with mine.
Oh, maybe he was named after you.
He could have been.
You never know.
I
guess so. Maybe we'll get him on our show someday. There are any Xavier fans out there, tell him we want him on our show so we can get the real answer. The question for those of you that maybe don't listen to our Razorcast was, what does JP of JP McCara stand for? We do not have an answer for that. But today, in true form, going along with something we've talked about today, talking about losing streaks, some of the major teams having 2-3 game losing streaks, I thought to myself, I wonder what the longest losing streak in Division I basketball is. I bet you don't know.
Yeah, who keeps track of those things? I'm sure somebody.
NCAA.
And there's, is it all divisions, or are you just talking about Division I?
No, Division I. Although I do have the answer for all divisions also, which is an amazing number. The number is 28. Division I team that lost 28 games in a row, and actually was from 2010 to 2012, not too long ago. But I think it is a pretty hidden. I wouldn't have known this.
28 in a row.
28 in a row. They are in the Colonial Athletic Association. I know that's the one that you really follow.
Yeah, I'm up on top of all those things. So that'll throw it. I couldn't tell you 3 teams in the Colonial. Just Colonial up and see if it even comes across as a conference in the big ones. Yeah, there it is. Okay. First name on there is Towson State. Was that it?
That's them. The Towson Tigers lost 28 games from December 29th, 2010 up until January 28, 2012. And actually the first game that started there, or actually the last game they won before that losing streak, they won in overtime. So it actually could have easily been 29 games. But on January 28, 2012, they beat University of North Carolina at Wilmington and ended that streak at 28 games. So for Division I, that is the record. But as you ask, what other divisions? In Division III, this is just amazing. We have a team that lost 207 games in a row.
Oh, wait a minute. I know this one now because I read about it. Caltech. It's Caltech.
The Caltech Beavers lost.
Yeah, there was an article about them in Sports Illustrated last year or the year before about their struggles and just getting people to play on it. Actually a very interesting article because it talked about the different members of the team and what they were studying at Caltech and how they had almost no scholarship players, but they still went out there and sort of studied it as engineers to try to find a way to win. But I think you're right. I think they're still on the schneid, aren't they?
Well, they've broken it in 2011, I think. Here's another footnote, 207 games in a row, but they actually went 26 years straight without winning a game in their conference, and that totaled 310 conference games they lost in a row from 1985 to 2011. So when you think things are bad, there's always something worse.
Think of Caltech. Yeah, and the only reason I said Towson State is when I call it, they're actually at 10-1 now. They're at the top of the Colonial Athletic Association standing. So that's they've obviously turned that baby around.
Here's your geography question of the day. Where is Towson located? Can you give me a state?
Baltimore. It's in Baltimore.
Actually, it's in Towson, but Towson is very close to Baltimore. You are correct. Baltimore, Maryland. It's near.
Yeah.
All right. You got something for? Oh, you know what? I came across. Actually, I was listening to Mike and Golick. Golick and Wingo this morning. They had see if these hit your dates. They had December 12th. Today's December 12th. Yeah, it is. 1976. Joe Namath played his last professional football game. December 12th, 1965. Gil Sayers scored 6 touchdowns.
6 touchdowns. That's right.
And you'll like this one, baseball history. In December 12th, 1949, the American League voted, not successfully, but voted to try to make the spitball legal.
Yep.
Didn't pass.
There it is. You're getting into the spirit of things. I got a couple other goodies for you from a couple things. There's also 1951 that Joe DiMaggio announced his retirement. We probably can get to that. The big news today, and you'll like this because of the things you coached. In 1930, the ground rule double was born in Major League Baseball. And actually, there were several rule changes in 1930 in the offseason, but this was when they decided that if a ball bounced into the stands, it would be a double. Before that, it was considered a home run.
And then that kind of taint Babe Ruth. Don't they think a lot of his, maybe, or some of them anyway, bounced over the wall or whatever?
And actually, the term is misspoken in the rule books. It's called an automatic double because a ground rule double can only be if it's the specific rules to the ground of the home team. So since this is a major league rule and they all have fences now, any ball that bounces into the stands is called an automatic double, even though most people use the term ground rule double. It doesn't surprise you in a sport where they still call the foul pole, even though it's in fair territory. So that's 1930. A couple other neat things is 1968, Arthur Ashe becomes the first male African-American player to be ranked number 1 in the world in tennis. And he was preceded 9 years earlier on the female circuit by Althea Gibson. And it was 36 years ago yesterday, before everyone and their mother was called the GOAT, that the real greatest of all time fought his last professional fight. Muhammad Ali lost a 10-round decision to up-and-coming Canadian heavyweight Trevor Berbick, who several years later would become the WBC champion. But in losing that decision, Muhammad Ali hung it up just weeks before his 40th birthday. And, of course, we lost the great Muhammad Ali not too long ago, and his legacy reaches into many aspects of sport. We will be back on the air on Thursday with our weekly Razorcast with all things Xavier Muskie basketball, and we'll be back with you next week on Tuesday for another Trogcast. And thank you all for joining, and my good pastor and the Grueling Truth website for hosting all these. And hope whoever your team is, you enjoy cheering for them as you go through this holiday season.